The unfaithful bride was cheating on her millionaire fiancé, who was blind and paralyzed, right in front of him, in the arms of his best friend. But what she didn't know was that he already knew, and he was just waiting for the perfect moment to make them pay the highest price of their lives. The sun-drenched skyline of Miami glittered like a mirage on the horizon as Arthur Montenegro's private jet touched down at Miami International Airport. At 45, Arthur was the epitome of the American dream, a self-made millionaire with a chain of luxury hotels spanning the East Coast. As he stepped onto the tarmac, his Italian leather shoes gleaming in the Florida sun, Arthur couldn't help but smile. Life had been good to him, almost implausibly so. "Mr. Montenegro, welcome back to Miami," his chauffeur, James, greeted him with a respectful nod. "I trust your trip to New York was successful?" Arthur's grin widened. "James, my friend, when have you known me to have an unsuccessful trip?" He clapped the chauffeur on the shoulder as he slid into the back of the sleek black Bentley. "The Excelsior deal is done. We'll be breaking ground on our new Manhattan location next month." As the car pulled away from the airport, Arthur loosened his tie and gazed out at the palm-lined streets. His mind drifted to the other reason for his good mood. In just 2 short weeks, he would be marrying the woman of his dreams. Isabel Reyes had entered his life like a whirlwind 18 months ago. At a charity gala in Los Angeles, she had caught his eye from across the room, all legs, curves, and cascading dark hair. But it wasn't just her beauty that had captivated him. Isabel was sharp, witty, and ambitious. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had. Arthur's phone buzzed, interrupting his reverie. A text from Isabel lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you, darling. Dinner at 8. XO." He quickly typed back a reply. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, I have a surprise for you." As the Bentley cruised down Ocean Drive, Arthur's thoughts turned to his best friend, Miguel Sanchez. They had met as freshmen at Harvard Business School, 2 ambitious young men from different worlds. Arthur, the son of Portuguese immigrants who had scraped together every penny to send him to college, and Miguel, the scion of a wealthy Mexican family. Despite their different backgrounds, they had formed an instant bond. Miguel had been by Arthur's side through every triumph and setback as he built his hotel empire from the ground up, and now Miguel would stand beside him as his best man when he married Isabel. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Montenegro, Arthur's flagship hotel in South Beach. As he stepped out, the doorman rushed to greet him. "Welcome back, Mr. Montenegro. Everything's been running smoothly in your absence, sir." Arthur nodded, pleased. "Excellent, Thomas. I'll be in my office if anyone needs me." As he strode through the opulent lobby, heads turned. Arthur Montenegro was a man who commanded attention without even trying. His success story was the stuff of legend in Miami's business circles, from a small bed and breakfast in the Florida Keys to a chain of 5-star hotels, all achieved before his 40th birthday. In the elevator, Arthur caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored walls. At 45, he was still in his prime, salt and pepper hair artfully styled, his tanned skin a testament to weekends spent on his yacht. The perfect life he had built seemed almost too good to be true. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean. Arthur walked to his desk, running his hand along the polished mahogany surface. A knock at the door interrupted his moment of reflection. "Come in," he called out. Miguel strode in, a wide smile on his face. "Arthur, my friend, welcome back." The 2 men embraced warmly. "Miguel, good to see you. How are the wedding preparations coming along?" Miguel's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Everything's under control. Isabel's been a bit demanding, but nothing we can't handle." Arthur chuckled. "That's my girl. Always knows exactly what she wants." "Speaking of which," Miguel said, his tone growing serious, "there's something I wanted to talk to you about. It's about Isabel." But before Miguel could finish, Arthur's phone rang. He held up a hand to pause the conversation. "Sorry, I have to take this. It's the New York contractors." As Arthur turned away to take the call, he missed the flash of frustration that crossed Miguel's face. By the time he ended the call and turned back, Miguel's expression had returned to its usual easygoing smile. "Sorry about that, Miguel. You were saying something about Isabel." Miguel hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "It's nothing important. Just some last-minute wedding details. We can discuss it later." Arthur nodded, already distracted by thoughts of his upcoming dinner with Isabel. "All right, if you're sure. Now, Tell me about this bachelor party you've been planning. Nothing too wild, I hope? Miguel laughed, but there was an edge to it that Arthur didn't notice. Don't worry, my friend. It'll be a night to remember. As the sun began to set over Miami Beach, Arthur left his office and headed to the valet stand. His bright red Ferrari waited for him, engine purring. He slid into the driver's seat, relishing the feel of the leather and the power at his fingertips. The drive to Isabel's beachfront condo was quick, the streets of Miami a blur as Arthur sped through the evening traffic. His mind was already on the surprise he had planned for her, a pair of diamond earrings he had picked up in New York, a preview of the exquisite jewelry he planned to shower her with after their wedding. As he pulled up to Isabel's building, he saw her waiting for him on the sidewalk. She was a vision in a form-fitting red dress, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Arthur felt his breath catch in his throat, as it always did when he saw her. "There's my handsome fiancé," Isabel purred as she slid into the passenger seat. She leaned over to give him a lingering kiss. "I missed you." "I missed you too, querida," Arthur replied, drinking in the sight of her. "You look absolutely stunning." As they drove to the restaurant, Isabel chatted animatedly about the wedding plans and the latest society gossip. Arthur listened with half an ear, content just to be in her presence. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to have found her. At the restaurant, a trendy new spot with a months-long waiting list, they were immediately shown to the best table. The maitre d' himself came to take their order, fawning over Arthur as if he were royalty. "So," Isabel said once they were alone, her dark eyes sparkling with curiosity, "you mentioned a surprise?" Arthur grinned, reaching into his pocket for the small velvet box. "Close your eyes," he instructed. Isabel obliged, a smile playing on her lips. Arthur opened the box and carefully fastened the diamond earrings to her ears. "Okay, you can look now." Isabel's eyes flew open, and she gasped as she felt the weight of the earrings. She pulled out her compact mirror, admiring the way the diamonds caught the light. "Oh, Arthur, they're exquisite." She leaned across the table to kiss him. "You spoil me." "You deserve to be spoiled," Arthur replied, his heart swelling with love and pride. As they enjoyed their meal, Arthur couldn't help but reflect on how perfect his life had become. A successful business, a beautiful fiancé, a loyal best friend. He truly had it all. But as the old saying goes, pride comes before a fall. And Arthur Montenegro's fall was coming, faster and harder than he could have ever imagined. Later that night, as Arthur drove home along the winding coastal road, his mind was still on Isabel and their upcoming wedding. The Ferrari hugged the curves of the road, responsive to his every touch. The moon hung low over the ocean, casting a silvery path across the water. It happened in an instant. As Arthur rounded a particularly sharp bend, he pressed his foot to the brake pedal and felt it sink to the floor with no resistance. His heart leapt into his throat as he realized the brakes had failed. The car picked up speed, the needle on the speedometer climbing rapidly. Arthur fought to keep control, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He pumped the brakes frantically, but to no avail. "No, no, no," he muttered, panic rising in his chest. The headlights of an oncoming car appeared around the bend. Arthur swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. Time seemed to slow down. Arthur saw the guardrail approaching, knew that he couldn't make the next turn. In that moment, his entire life flashed before his eyes. His parents' proud faces at his college graduation, the opening of his first hotel, Miguel's laughter, Isabel's smile. The Ferrari smashed through the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal. For a moment, Arthur felt as if he were flying. Then came the impact. The world went black. When Arthur regained consciousness, he was aware of two things: searing pain throughout his body and darkness. Complete, impenetrable darkness. He could hear voices around him, urgent and professional. The antiseptic smell told him he was in a hospital before he even heard the steady beep of machines monitoring his vital signs. "Mr. Montenegro, can you hear me?" A woman's voice, firm but kind. Arthur tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw. He managed a weak nod. "You've been in an accident, Mr. Montenegro. You're at Miami General Hospital. I'm Dr. Patel. Can you tell me if you're experiencing any pain?" "Everywhere," Arthur croaked. Why can't I see?" There was a pause, heavy with unspoken concern. "Mr. Montenegro, the accident caused some complications. We're still running tests, but it appears there may be damage to your optic nerves." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. Blind? It couldn't be possible. This had to be a nightmare. As the reality of his situation began to sink in, Arthur felt a wave of despair wash over him. In the span of a single night, his entire world had been turned upside down. The perfect life he had built now seemed to be crumbling around him. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of his troubles. The true test of Arthur Montenegro's character and the loyalty of those closest to him was yet to come. As the days in Miami General Hospital blurred into weeks, Arthur Montenegro's world became a tapestry of sounds, smells, and textures. The constant beeping of machines, the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors, the cool touch of stethoscopes against his skin, these were now the landmarks of his existence. The darkness that had enveloped him since the accident showed no signs of lifting, and with each passing day the gravity of his situation became more apparent. Dr. Patel's voice, once filled with cautious optimism, now carried a weight of resignation. "Mr. Montenegro, I'm afraid the damage to your optic nerves is more severe than we initially thought. While there's always hope for some recovery, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your vision loss may be permanent." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had been clinging to the hope that this was temporary, that he would wake up one morning and see the sunlight streaming through his hospital window. Now, that hope was slipping away like sand through his fingers. But the bad news didn't stop there. Dr. Patel continued, her voice gentle but firm. "There's also the matter of your mobility. The spinal trauma you sustained in the accident has affected your lower body function. With intensive physical therapy, we're hopeful for improvement, but you need to be prepared for the possibility of long-term mobility issues." Arthur lay there, trying to process the information. Blind and potentially unable to walk, it was as if the universe was playing a cruel joke on him. He, Arthur Montenegro, who had always stood tall and proud, who had built an empire with his own two hands, was now dependent on others for the most basic of tasks. As he grappled with this new reality, Arthur became acutely aware of the changes in the people around him. Isabel, his fiancée, who had been a constant presence in the early days after the accident, began to visit less frequently. When she did come, her kisses were perfunctory, her hand in his lacking the warmth it once held. "I'm sorry, darling," she would say, her voice tinged with what Arthur thought might be guilt. "I've been so busy dealing with the press and managing the crisis at the company. You understand, don't you?" Arthur would nod, not trusting himself to speak. He did understand on some level. His accident had thrown more than just his personal life into chaos. His company, his life's work, was undoubtedly in turmoil. But a small nagging voice in the back of his mind couldn't help but wonder, was that all there was to Isabel's growing distance? Miguel, on the other hand, seemed to be around more than ever. Arthur's best friend had taken charge of both the company and the wedding preparations, insisting that Arthur focus solely on his recovery. "Don't worry about a thing, my friend," Miguel would say, his hand resting on Arthur's shoulder. "I've got everything under control. You just concentrate on getting better." On the surface, Miguel's devotion seemed admirable, but as the days wore on, Arthur began to notice subtle changes in his friend's behavior. There was a new edge to Miguel's voice when he spoke about the company, a hint of possessiveness that hadn't been there before. And sometimes when Isabel and Miguel were both in the room, Arthur could swear he sensed a tension in the air, an unspoken current running between them. It was during one of these visits that Arthur first began to suspect that something was amiss. Isabel had just arrived, the scent of her expensive perfume filling the room. "Oh, Miguel, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise that seemed slightly forced to Arthur's increasingly sensitive ears. "I was just updating Arthur on some company matters," Miguel replied smoothly. "But I can come back later if you two want some privacy." No, stay," Isabel said quickly. Too quickly. "I can't stay long anyway. I have a meeting to get to." As they chatted, Arthur lay silent, his unseeing eyes fixed on the ceiling. He strained to catch every nuance in their voices, every rustle of movement. Was it his imagination, or did Miguel move closer to Isabel as they spoke? Did her breath catch slightly when Miguel laughed? After they left, Arthur lay awake for hours, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his instincts, his ability to read people and situations. Now, robbed of his sight, those instincts were screaming at him that something wasn't right. It was in this state of emotional turmoil that Arthur first met Yvonne Santos, the night shift nurse assigned to his care. Her voice, warm and accented with the lilt of her native Brazil, cut through the fog of Arthur's spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Montenegro, I'm Yvonne, your new nurse. I'm going to check your vitals now, okay?" There was something about Yvonne's presence that immediately put Arthur at ease. Her touch was gentle but sure, her movements efficient but never rushed. As she worked, she kept up a steady stream of conversation, her voice low and soothing in the quiet of the night. "You know, Mr. Montenegro, I've worked with many patients in your situation," Yvonne said, as she adjusted his IV. "It's not easy, I know, but I've seen incredible things. The human spirit is stronger than any injury." For the first time since the accident, Arthur felt a glimmer of hope. "Please," he said, his voice rough with disuse, "call me Arthur." Over the next few weeks, Yvonne became Arthur's lifeline. She was there during the long, lonely nights when sleep eluded him, always ready with a kind word or a funny story from her homeland. She encouraged him during his physical therapy sessions, celebrating every small victory as if it were a monumental achievement. "You moved your toes today, Arthur," she exclaimed one afternoon, her joy palpable. "Do you know what this means? It means your body is fighting back. You're not giving up, and neither will I." With Yvonne's unwavering support, Arthur began to make progress. The feeling in his legs started to return, first as pins and needles, then as more substantial sensations. He still couldn't walk, but he could now move his legs voluntarily, a development that Dr. Patel called extremely encouraging. But even as his physical condition improved, Arthur's suspicions about Isabel and Miguel continued to grow. One evening, as Yvonne was helping him settle in for the night, Arthur finally voiced the fears that had been gnawing at him. "Yvonne," he said hesitantly, "can I ask you something? It might seem strange." "Of course, Arthur. You can ask me anything." Arthur took a deep breath. "When Isabel and Miguel are here together, do you notice anything unusual about them, the way they interact?" There was a long pause, and Arthur could almost feel Yvonne's discomfort. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Arthur, I'm not sure it's my place to say anything, but if you're asking if I've noticed a certain closeness between them, then yes, I have." The confirmation of his suspicions hit Arthur like a physical blow. He had hoped, desperately, that he was imagining things, that his inability to see was making him paranoid. But Yvonne's words shattered that illusion. "There's more," Yvonne continued, her voice low. "I've overheard them talking when they think no one is around. They speak of the future, of plans. Plans that don't seem to include you, Arthur." Arthur lay there, his unseeing eyes wide open as the full implications of Yvonne's words sank in. Isabel, the woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to marry, was betraying him with his best friend, and not just betraying him, but seemingly planning a future without him. "Thank you, Yvonne," Arthur said, his voice eerily calm. "Thank you for being honest with me." As Yvonne left the room, promising to check on him later, Arthur's mind was racing. The pieces were falling into place now. Isabel's growing distance, Miguel's increased presence at the company, the tension he had sensed between them. It all made a horrible kind of sense. But even as pain and betrayal threatened to overwhelm him, a new emotion began to take root in Arthur's heart. Anger, a cold, calculated anger that pushed aside the despair and self-pity. He had built himself up from nothing once before. He could do it again, and this time he would make sure that those who had betrayed him paid for their actions. The next morning, when Dr. Patel came for her rounds, she found a changed Arthur Montenegro. Gone was the defeated man of the past weeks. In his place was someone with a steely determination, a man with a purpose. "Dr. Patel," Arthur said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "I want to discuss my treatment options. All of them. I'm not giving up. Not on my sight, not on my mobility, not on anything." Dr. Patel, taken aback by this sudden change, began to outline various experimental treatments and aggressive therapy regimens. As she spoke, Arthur listened intently, his unseeing eyes focused on her as if he could will himself to see through sheer force of will. "I want to try everything," Arthur said when she had finished. "Whatever it takes. I'm going to beat this." As Dr. Patel left, promising to set up consultations with specialists, Arthur allowed himself a small, grim smile. Yes, he would beat this. He would regain his strength, his independence. And then, only then, would he confront Isabel and Miguel. But for now, he had to play the part of the helpless invalid. He had to make them believe that they had won, that Arthur Montenegro was no longer a threat to their plans. Little did they know, their betrayal had awakened a part of Arthur that had long lain dormant, a part that was cunning, ruthless, and absolutely determined to have its revenge. As the days passed, Arthur threw himself into his recovery with a fervor that amazed his doctors and nurses. He pushed himself to the limit in every physical therapy session, gritting his teeth against the pain and exhaustion. In his private moments with Yvonne, he began to confide his plans, trusting in her discretion and her growing loyalty to him. "Yvonne," he said one night, his voice low and intense, "I need your help. I can't let Isabel and Miguel know how much I'm improving. Can you help me keep this secret?" Yvonne, who had grown to care deeply for Arthur, agreed without hesitation. "Of course, Arthur. You can count on me. But what are you planning?" Arthur's unseeing eyes seemed to bore into her. "Justice, Yvonne, I'm planning justice." As Arthur's secret recovery progressed, Isabel and Miguel continued their charade, unaware that their every word, every action, was being carefully noted and remembered. Arthur, with his other senses heightened by his blindness, began to pick up on subtleties he might have missed before. The slight catch in Isabel's breath when Miguel entered the room, the possessive tone in Miguel's voice when he spoke of the company. One day, as Isabel was leaving after a particularly short and distracted visit, Arthur decided to test the waters. "Isabel," he called out, his voice deliberately weak and plaintive, "when are we going to reschedule the wedding? I was thinking, maybe once I'm out of the hospital." There was a long pause before Isabel responded, her voice strained. "Oh, Arthur, darling, let's not worry about that now. You need to focus on getting better. We have all the time in the world." As the door closed behind her, Arthur allowed himself a bitter smile. All the time in the world indeed. Little did Isabel know, time was rapidly running out for her and Miguel's schemes. It was during one of his late-night conversations with Yvonne that Arthur first broached the subject that had been nagging at him since the accident. "Yvonne," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you something. The night of my accident, do you think it could have been more than just a random mechanical failure?" Yvonne's sharp intake of breath told Arthur all he needed to know. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I've been wanting to tell you something. The night you were brought in, I overheard two of the paramedics talking. They said the brake lines on your car looked like they had been tampered with." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Arthur lay there, his mind racing. If what Yvonne was saying was true, then this wasn't just a case of opportunistic betrayal. This was attempted murder. "Yvonne," Arthur said, his voice cold and determined, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out everything you can about that night. Talk to the paramedics, the police, anyone who might have information. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, Arthur," Yvonne replied without hesitation. "I'll find out everything I can." As Yvonne left to begin her covert investigation, Arthur lay in the darkness, his mind whirling with possibilities and plans. He had thought he was fighting against betrayal and greed. Now he realized he was fighting for his very life. The game had changed, and Arthur Montenegro was determined to be the one left standing when all was said and done. As weeks turned into months, Arthur's secret recovery continued to progress at a remarkable pace. His determination, coupled with cutting-edge treatments and intensive therapy, had yielded results that his doctors could only describe as miraculous. But it was a conversation with Dr. Patel that truly changed the game. "Mr. Montenegro," Dr. Patel began, her voice tinged with excitement, "I have some potentially groundbreaking news. A colleague of mine at Johns Hopkins has been developing an experimental treatment for optic nerve regeneration. Given the nature of your injury and your exceptional progress so far, you might be an ideal candidate." Arthur's heart raced. "What exactly does this treatment entail, Dr. Patel?" "It's a combination of stem cell therapy and bioelectric stimulation," she explained. "The procedure is still in its early stages, but the preliminary results have been, well, nothing short of astonishing. Some patients have regained up to 60% of their vision." For a moment, Arthur was speechless. The possibility of regaining his sight, even partially, was more than he had dared to hope for. But as the initial shock wore off, a new thought began to form in his mind. Dr. Patel, he said slowly, how many people know about this treatment? At the moment, just myself and the specialist team at Johns Hopkins. We haven't even informed your family or your company yet. We wanted to discuss it with you first. Arthur nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. I'd like to keep it that way for now if possible. I need time to process this information before making any decisions. Dr. Patel agreed, albeit reluctantly, to keep the potential treatment confidential for the time being. As soon as she left the room, Arthur called for Yvonne. Yvonne, he whispered urgently when she arrived, I need your help with something crucial. He outlined the situation to her, watching as understanding dawned on her face. You want to undergo the treatment in secret, she said. Not a question, but a statement. Yes, Arthur confirmed. If this works, if I regain even a fraction of my sight, it could change everything. But I can't let Isabel or Miguel know. Not yet. Yvonne was quiet for a moment, considering. It won't be easy, she said finally. But I think we can make it work. I'll coordinate with Dr. Patel and the team at Johns Hopkins. We'll schedule your treatments during times when Isabel and Miguel are least likely to visit. And so began the most daring phase of Arthur's plan. Over the next few weeks, he underwent a series of clandestine treatments. Each session left him drained and sometimes in pain, but he endured it all without complaint. The possibility of regaining his sight, of seeing the faces of those who had betrayed him, drove him forward. It was during one of these secret treatment sessions that Arthur experienced the first flicker of hope. As the doctors administered the bioelectric stimulation, he suddenly saw a flash of light in the darkness that had been his world for months. I saw something, he gasped, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and elation. The medical team erupted into excited chatter, but Arthur barely heard them. His mind was racing with the implications of this development. If the treatment continued to work, if he could regain even a portion of his vision, it would change everything. As the treatments progressed, Arthur's world slowly began to emerge from the darkness. At first, it was just vague shapes and shadows, but gradually colors and more defined forms started to appear. He kept this miraculous progress hidden from everyone, except Yvonne and his medical team, maintaining the charade of total blindness whenever Isabel or Miguel visited. It was during one of these visits that Arthur's newfound secret vision revealed the full extent of their betrayal. Isabel and Miguel had come to see him together, as they often did now. Arthur lay in his bed, pretending to be weaker than he actually was, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Arthur, darling, Isabel said, her voice syrupy sweet. How are you feeling today? As well as can be expected, Arthur replied, injecting a note of resignation into his voice. The doctors say I'm making progress, but, well, you know how it is. Of course, my friend, Miguel chimed in, his tone falsely sympathetic. But you mustn't lose hope. Isabel and I are here for you, always. As they spoke, Arthur could see them, blurry and indistinct, but unmistakably there. He watched as Miguel moved closer to Isabel, their bodies almost touching, and then, in a moment that seared itself into Arthur's memory, he saw Miguel lean in and kiss Isabel. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek or a comforting embrace. It was a lover's kiss, passionate and intimate. Isabel responded eagerly, her arms wrapping around Miguel's neck. Arthur lay there, his heart pounding, rage and pain warring within him. It took every ounce of his self-control not to leap from the bed and confront them then and there. But he knew he couldn't reveal his secret. Not yet. So he lay still, pretending to be oblivious to the betrayal happening mere feet away from him. When Isabel and Miguel finally broke apart, Arthur could hear the guilt in their voices as they made their excuses and left hurriedly. As soon as the door closed behind them, Arthur tore off his dark glasses, his partially restored vision blurry with tears of fury. Yvonne, he called out, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Yvonne, I need you. When the nurse hurried in, alarmed by the tone of his voice, Arthur grabbed her hand. I saw them, Yvonne, he hissed. I saw them kiss. Right here, right in front of me. They think I'm blind and helpless, but I saw everything. Yvonne squeezed his hand, her voice gentle but firm. What do you want to do, Arthur? Arthur took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. We stick to the plan, he said finally. But now it's personal. I'm going to destroy them, Yvonne. I'm going to take everything from them, just like they tried to take everything from me. As Arthur's vision continued to improve, albeit still far from perfect, he turned his attention to the other mystery that had been haunting him, the true cause of his accident. Yvonne had been diligently gathering information, speaking to paramedics, police officers, and even managing to get her hands on some of the initial accident reports. One evening, after making sure they were alone, Yvonne shared her findings with Arthur. "I've spoken to one of the paramedics who was at the scene that night," she began, her voice low and urgent. "He confirmed what I overheard before. The brake lines on your car had been cut." Arthur nodded grimly. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "Go on," he urged. "I also managed to get a look at the police report," Yvonne continued. "They found traces of a specialized cutting tool on the brake lines. Arthur, this wasn't just an accident. Someone deliberately tried to kill you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Arthur's mind raced, connecting the dots. The specialized cutting tool, the perfectly timed accident just weeks before his wedding, the swift takeover of his company by Miguel. "It was them," he said, his voice hard with certainty. "Isabel and Miguel, they planned this together." Yvonne nodded slowly. "I think you're right. But Arthur, proving it won't be easy. They've covered their tracks well." Arthur's lips curved into a grim smile. "They may have covered their tracks, Yvonne, but they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. They thought they had left me blind and broken, unable to fight back. But they were wrong." He reached out, grasping Yvonne's hand. "I need you to do something for me, Yvonne. I need you to be my eyes and ears. Watch them. Listen to their conversations when they think no one is paying attention. Can you do that?" Yvonne squeezed his hand. "Of course, Arthur, you can count on me." Over the next few weeks, as Arthur continued his secret vision treatments, Yvonne became his secret agent. She eavesdropped on conversations, noted down suspicious behavior, and even managed to sneak peeks at documents Miguel carelessly left lying around during his visits. It was during one of these covert operations that Yvonne made a startling discovery. She had overheard Miguel on the phone, speaking in hushed tones about an offshore account and a large sum of money that had been transferred just days before Arthur's accident. When Yvonne relayed this information to Arthur, his face hardened with resolve. "That's it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's the proof we need. They paid someone to tamper with my car. They tried to murder me." The realization that Isabel and Miguel had not only betrayed him emotionally, but had actually attempted to end his life, was the final straw for Arthur. Any lingering doubts or hesitations about his plan for revenge evaporated in the face of this cold, hard truth. "Yvonne," Arthur said, his voice filled with steely determination, "it's time to accelerate our plans. I want you to contact my lawyers, discreetly, of course. Tell them I need to make some changes to my will and to the company structure. And then we start laying the groundwork for Isabel and Miguel's downfall." As Yvonne left to carry out his instructions, Arthur lay back in his bed, his improving vision fixed on the ceiling. He thought about the life he had built, the empire he had created from nothing. He thought about the love he had shared with Isabel, the friendship he had cherished with Miguel. And he thought about how they had thrown it all away, how they had been willing to end his life for their own greed. In that moment, Arthur Montenegro made a vow to himself. He would rise from this hospital bed, he would reclaim his life and his company, and he would make Isabel and Miguel pay for their betrayal in ways they couldn't even imagine. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and this time, Arthur Montenegro intended to emerge as the undisputed victor. As the days passed, Arthur's vision continued to improve, though he was careful to keep this progress hidden from everyone except Yvonne and his trusted medical team. He could now make out distinct shapes and colors, and while his sight was far from perfect, it was a vast improvement from the total darkness he had been living in. One afternoon, as Arthur was going through his physical therapy exercises, Dr. Patel entered the room with an air of excitement. "Mr. Montenegro," she began, barely able to contain her enthusiasm, "I have some extraordinary news. The latest tests show significant regeneration in your optic nerves. If this trend continues, we believe you could regain up to 80% of your vision within the next few months." Arthur's heart soared at the news, but he kept his expression neutral. That's incredible, Dr. Patel, but I don't want to get my hopes up just yet, and I'd prefer if we kept this information confidential for now." I don't want to burden my loved ones with false hope. Dr. Patel nodded, though she looked slightly puzzled by his request. Of course, Mr. Montenegro, we'll continue to monitor your progress closely. As soon as the doctor left, Arthur called for Yvonne. When she entered, he grabbed her hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of joy and determination. Yvonne, did you hear? 80% vision. It's more than I could have ever hoped for. Yvonne squeezed his hand, her voice warm with genuine happiness for him. That's wonderful news, Arthur, but why did you ask Dr. Patel to keep it a secret? Arthur's expression turned serious. Because, Yvonne, the element of surprise is our greatest weapon right now. Isabel and Miguel think I'm still completely blind and helpless. We're going to use that misconception against them. As Arthur outlined his plan to Yvonne, his mind was already racing ahead, plotting and scheming. With his vision improving rapidly, and the evidence of Isabel and Miguel's betrayal mounting, he knew the time for his grand reveal was drawing near. But there was still work to be done. Arthur needed to ensure that when he finally confronted Isabel and Miguel, he would have an ironclad case against them. He couldn't risk them wriggling out of the consequences of their actions. Yvonne, Arthur said, his voice low and urgent, I need you to do something for me. It's risky, and I'll understand if you don't want to get involved. Yvonne looked at him steadily. What do you need, Arthur? I need you to get into Miguel's office at the company. There must be records there, of the money transfer, of their plans. We need concrete evidence. Yvonne hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. I'll do it. I have a friend who works in the cleaning staff at your company. I think I can arrange something. And so, on a quiet Sunday evening, when the offices were empty, Yvonne found herself sneaking into the headquarters of Montenegro Hotels. Her heart was pounding as she made her way to Miguel's office, using the access card her friend had provided. As she rifled through Miguel's desk and computer files, Yvonne's hands were shaking, but her determination to help Arthur kept her focused. And then, buried deep in a hidden folder on Miguel's computer, she found it. Emails between Miguel and Isabel discussing their plan in detail. The offshore account, the hired mechanic who had tampered with Arthur's car, their plans for the company after Arthur's unfortunate accident. Yvonne quickly copied the files onto a flash drive, her heart racing. As she was about to leave, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Panicking, she ducked behind a large potted plant just as the office door opened. To her horror, Miguel walked in, followed closely by Isabel. Yvonne held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice her. Are you sure it's safe to meet here? Isabel was saying, her voice nervous. Miguel laughed, a sound that sent chills down Yvonne's spine. Relax, my love. No one comes here on Sundays. And besides, Arthur is safely tucked away in his hospital bed, blind as a bat and none the wiser. As Yvonne watched, her blood boiling with anger, Miguel pulled Isabel close and kissed her passionately. Soon, he murmured against her lips, soon it will all be ours. The company, the money, everything. And poor blind Arthur will never know what hit him. Isabel giggled, a sound so at odds with the cruelty of their words that Yvonne had to stifle a gasp. You're right, she purred. I can't wait to be Mrs. Miguel Sanchez, CEO of Montenegro Hotels. As the couple continued their intimate moment, oblivious to their hidden observer, Yvonne's mind was racing. She needed to get out of there, to get back to Arthur with this damning evidence. But more than that, she needed to warn him, because from what she had just overheard, it was clear that Isabel and Miguel's plans for Arthur were far from over. Yvonne remained hidden, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for Isabel and Miguel to leave. After what felt like an eternity, the couple finally exited the office, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Yvonne waited a few more minutes to ensure they were gone before she cautiously emerged from her hiding spot. Her hands trembling, she quickly checked the flash drive to make sure all the incriminating files were saved. Satisfied, she slipped out of the office and made her way out of the building, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed and overheard. The drive back to the hospital seemed to take forever. Yvonne's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, anger at Isabel and Miguel's betrayal, fear for Arthur's safety, and determination to help him get justice. As soon as she arrived, she rushed to Arthur's room, barely remembering to knock before entering. Arthur, she gasped out of breath, I have it. I have everything. Arthur, who had been pretending to sleep in case of unexpected visitors, sat up immediately. Yvonne, what happened? Are you all right? Yvonne quickly recounted her adventure at the office, including the conversation she had overheard between Isabel and Miguel. As she spoke, she could see Arthur's expression hardening, his partially recovered vision allowing him to see the distress on her face. "You've done well, Yvonne," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've done more than well. You've given us exactly what we need to bring them down." He reached out, grasping Yvonne's hand. "But you've also put yourself at great risk. From now on, you need to be extra careful. Isabel and Miguel can't suspect that we know anything." Yvonne nodded, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about me, Arthur. I can take care of myself. What's important now is figuring out our next move." Arthur was quiet for a moment, his mind working furiously. "We need to act fast," he said finally. "But we also need to be smart about this. We can't tip our hand too soon." Over the next few hours, Arthur and Yvonne pored over the files she had retrieved, piecing together the full extent of Isabel and Miguel's betrayal. The evidence was damning. Not only had they planned Arthur's accident, but they had been systematically siphoning money from the company for months, preparing for their takeover. As dawn broke, Arthur had formulated a plan. "Yvonne," he said, his voice filled with grim determination, "I need you to arrange a meeting with my lawyers. It's time to set things in motion." Over the next few weeks, Arthur worked tirelessly behind the scenes, all while maintaining his facade of helplessness. His lawyers, sworn to secrecy, helped him restructure his company and his will, creating a complex web of legal protections that would spring into action at the right moment. Meanwhile, Arthur's vision continued to improve. He could now make out faces clearly, though he still wore dark glasses around Isabel and Miguel to maintain the illusion of blindness. Every time they visited, every false word of comfort they offered, only fueled Arthur's determination to see justice done. One afternoon, as Arthur was finishing up a secret physical therapy session, Dr. Patel entered the room with a broad smile on her face. "Mr. Montenegro," she said, barely containing her excitement, "I have wonderful news. The latest tests show that your vision has improved beyond our most optimistic projections. You're now at approximately 75% of normal vision, and we expect further improvement." Arthur allowed himself a small smile. "That's incredible, Dr. Patel. I can't thank you and your team enough for everything you've done." Dr. Patel's expression turned serious. "Arthur, I have to ask, why are you still keeping this a secret from your fiancé and your friend? Surely they would be overjoyed to know about your progress." Arthur's face hardened for a moment before he schooled his features back into a neutral expression. "I appreciate your concern, Dr. Patel, but I have my reasons. I promise you all will be revealed in due time." As Dr. Patel left, visibly confused by Arthur's response, Yvonne entered the room. She had overheard the conversation and could see the tension in Arthur's face. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, moving to his side. Arthur turned to her, and for a moment, Yvonne could see the full weight of his pain and anger in his eyes. "I'm fine, Yvonne. It's just hearing about my progress, knowing how close we are to the endgame. It's overwhelming." Yvonne nodded understandingly. "I can only imagine. But Arthur, are you sure about this? The path you're on? There's no going back once we set things in motion." Arthur's expression hardened. "I'm sure, Yvonne, they tried to take everything from me. My life, my company, my future. They betrayed me in the worst possible way. I can't let that go unpunished." He reached out, taking Yvonne's hand in his. "But I want you to know, I couldn't have done any of this without you. Whatever happens, I'll make sure you're taken care of." Yvonne squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm not doing this for any reward, Arthur. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and because I care about you." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken emotions. But before either of them could say anything more, there was a knock at the door. Arthur quickly put on his dark glasses as Yvonne called out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal Isabel and Miguel. Arthur felt his body tense involuntarily at the sight of them, but he forced himself to relax, to play the role of the helpless invalid. "Arthur, darling," Isabel cooed, moving to his bedside, "how are you feeling today?" "As well as can be expected," Arthur replied, injecting a note of weariness into his voice. "The doctors say I'm making progress, but, well, you know how it is." Miguel clapped a hand on Arthur's shoulder, the gesture feeling like a brand to Arthur's skin. "Don't lose hope, my friend. Isabel and I are here for you always." As Isabel and Miguel chatted, filling the air with false concern and empty platitudes, Arthur watched them from behind his dark glasses. He could see every nuance of their expressions now, every shared glance, every subtle touch. It took every ounce of his self-control not to confront them then and there. But Arthur knew he had to be patient. The pieces were almost in place. Soon, very soon, he would have his revenge. And when that moment came, Isabel and Miguel would learn the true cost of their betrayal. As the visit drew to a close, Isabel leaned in to kiss Arthur's cheek. "We'll see you soon, darling. Try to rest, okay?" Arthur nodded, mustering a weak smile. "Thank you both for coming. I don't know what I'd do without you." As soon as the door closed behind them, Arthur tore off his glasses, his eyes blazing with fury. "Yvonne," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's time. Make the calls. Set everything in motion." Yvonne nodded, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Are you sure, Arthur? Once we do this—" "I'm sure," Arthur interrupted. "It's time Isabel and Miguel learned that their actions have consequences. It's time for justice." As Yvonne left to make the necessary arrangements, Arthur stood up from his bed, walking to the window. He looked out at the Miami skyline, the city he had once conquered and would soon reclaim. His vision, now almost fully restored, took in every detail of the bustling metropolis below. Arthur Montenegro had been knocked down, betrayed by those he trusted most. But he hadn't been defeated. He had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. And now he was ready to reclaim what was rightfully his, and to make those who had wronged him pay dearly for their treachery. The stage was set. The players were in position, and Arthur Montenegro was about to orchestrate the performance of a lifetime, a symphony of justice and retribution that would leave Miami and the business world in shock. As the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across his hospital room, Arthur allowed himself a small, grim smile. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, Isabel and Miguel would learn the true meaning of the old adage: revenge is a dish best served cold. And Arthur Montenegro was ready to serve it with a side of poetic justice. As the first rays of dawn broke over Miami's skyline, Arthur Montenegro stood at the window of his hospital room, his gaze fixed on the city he once ruled. The past months had been a crucible of pain, betrayal, and rebirth. Now, as he watched the city come to life, he felt a surge of determination coursing through his veins. Today was the day he would begin to reclaim his empire. "Are you ready, Arthur?" Yvonne's soft voice came from behind him. Arthur turned, his eyes meeting hers. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day, forged in the fires of adversity. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice steady. The day began with a flurry of activity. Dr. Patel arrived early, conducting a final series of tests to clear Arthur for discharge. As she reviewed the results, her face lit up with amazement. "Mr. Montenegro, your recovery is nothing short of miraculous," she exclaimed. "Your vision has stabilized at 85% of normal function, and your physical therapy progress is exceptional. Medically speaking, there's no reason to keep you here any longer." Arthur nodded, allowing a small smile to cross his face. "Thank you, Dr. Patel, for everything." As the doctor left to prepare the discharge papers, Arthur turned to Yvonne. "It's time to set the wheels in motion. Make the call." Yvonne nodded, pulling out her phone and dialing a number. "Mr. Goldstein, it's time. Initiate Protocol Lazarus." With those words, Arthur's carefully crafted plan began to unfold. Across the city, a series of legal and financial maneuvers were set into motion, invisible to the outside world, but poised to reshape the landscape of Montenegro hotels. As Arthur prepared to leave the hospital, he paused for a moment of reflection. The past months had been a journey through the darkest depths of despair and back again. He remembered the initial shock of waking up in darkness, the crushing weight of betrayal as he discovered Isabel and Miguel's treachery, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding himself, body, mind, and spirit. "Penny for your thoughts?" Yvonne asked, sensing his introspective mood. Arthur turned to her, his eyes softening. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. How much has changed. 6 months ago, I thought I had it all. Success, love, friendship. Now I know how hollow those things were." Yvonne reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "Not everything was hollow, Arthur. You've built something real here, something strong, and you're not alone." Arthur squeezed her hand back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "No, I'm not alone. Thanks to you." As they left the hospital, Arthur's mind turned to the next phase of his plan. The coming weeks would be crucial, a delicate dance of deception and revelation. He would need to maintain the facade of the broken, blind invalid while secretly orchestrating his comeback. Their first stop was a nondescript office building in downtown Miami. Inside, Arthur's team of lawyers waited, led by the sharp-minded Sarah Goldstein. "Mr. Montenegro," Sarah greeted him, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "It's good to see you on your feet. Are you ready to review the final details of Operation Phoenix?" Arthur nodded, taking a seat at the head of the conference table. For the next several hours, they pored over legal documents, financial statements, and strategic plans. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential loophole closed. By the time they finished, Arthur felt confident that his plan was watertight. "Excellent work, everyone," he said, standing up. "Now, let's move on to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved a secret meeting with the board of directors of Montenegro Hotels. One by one, Arthur's most trusted executives were brought into his confidence, sworn to secrecy, and briefed on the true state of affairs. The shock on their faces as Arthur revealed Isabel and Miguel's betrayal quickly turned to anger, then determination to set things right. As the sun set on that first day of freedom, Arthur found himself back in his penthouse apartment. Looking out over the city he was poised to reclaim, Yvonne stood beside him, a comforting presence in the gathering twilight. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering. "Determined," he finally said, "but also conflicted. Part of me wants to rush in, to confront Isabel and Miguel immediately. But I know we need to be patient, to let them think they've won before we spring the trap." Yvonne nodded understandingly. "It's not easy playing the long game, but it's necessary." As the days passed, Arthur threw himself into his recovery and his plans with equal fervor. His physical therapy sessions became more intense, pushing his body to its limits as he worked to regain his former strength. At the same time, he spent hours in clandestine meetings, fine-tuning every aspect of his strategy. Throughout it all, Yvonne remained by his side, a pillar of strength and support. Their relationship deepened, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. There were quiet moments of companionship, shared laughter over late-night strategy sessions, and an unspoken understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Arthur turned to Yvonne, his expression serious. "I want you to know," he began, "that whatever happens, whatever the outcome of all this, I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my eyes, my ears, my strength through all of this." Yvonne's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Arthur, But before she could finish, Arthur's phone rang. It was Isabel. Arthur's face hardened as he answered, slipping back into the role of the helpless invalid. "Hello, darling," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound weak and tired. "Arthur, sweetheart," Isabel's voice dripped with false concern. "How are you feeling? Miguel and I were thinking of stopping by tomorrow to discuss the wedding plans. Do you feel up to it?" Arthur felt a surge of anger at her audacity, but he kept his voice steady. "Of course, my love, I'd like that very much." As he hung up, he turned to Yvonne, his eyes blazing with determination. "It's time to accelerate our plans. The wedding will be the perfect stage for our final act." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. On the surface, wedding preparations moved forward, with Isabel taking charge and making grandiose plans for what she clearly believed would be her ascension to the role of Mrs. Montenegro, CEO. Behind the scenes, Arthur and his team worked tirelessly, setting up the elaborate trap that would spring shut on the unsuspecting couple. As the wedding day approached, Arthur found himself increasingly reflective. Late one night, unable to sleep, he stood at the window of his penthouse, lost in thought. Yvonne, sensing his mood, joined him. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently. Arthur sighed, his gaze fixed on the twinkling lights of the city below. "I've been thinking about trust," he said slowly, "about how easily it can be given and how devastatingly it can be broken." He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I trusted Isabel with my heart, Miguel with my friendship and my business. I thought I knew them, thought they cared for me. How could I have been so blind?" Yvonne reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Arthur, their betrayal isn't a reflection on you. It's a reflection on them. You saw the best in people, believed in their goodness. That's not a weakness, it's a strength. Arthur squeezed her hand, drawing comfort from her presence. Maybe you're right, but I can't help but wonder, will I ever be able to trust like that again? Yvonne's gaze was steady, her voice soft but firm. You will, because despite everything that's happened, you haven't let it break you. You've grown stronger, wiser, and when the time comes, you'll open your heart again to the right person. The unspoken words hung between them, charged with possibility. For a moment, Arthur felt a pull towards her, an urge to close the distance between them. But the moment passed, both of them aware that now was not the time, not with so much still at stake. As the wedding day drew nearer, the pace of preparations intensified. Arthur played his part to perfection, appearing weak and dependent in front of Isabel and Miguel, while secretly orchestrating every detail of his plan. Yvonne remained his constant shadow, his confidant and co-conspirator. 3 days before the wedding, Arthur called a final meeting with his legal team. "Is everything in place?" he asked, his voice tense with anticipation. Sarah Goldstein nodded, a predatory smile on her face. "Everything is ready, Mr. Montenegro. The moment you give the signal, we'll initiate the takeover. Isabel and Miguel won't know what hit them." Arthur nodded, satisfaction coursing through him. "Excellent. And the evidence?" "All compiled and verified," Sarah confirmed. "We have ironclad proof of their embezzlement, their plot against you, everything. They'll be lucky if they avoid prison time." As the meeting concluded, Arthur felt a sense of finality settling over him. Years of hard work, months of pain and betrayal, weeks of careful planning. It all came down to this. In 3 days, he would reclaim his life, his company, and his dignity. That night, as he prepared for bed, Arthur caught sight of himself in the mirror. The man who looked back at him was not the same one who had entered the hospital all those months ago. This Arthur Montenegro was leaner, harder, his eyes glinting with a steely determination. He had been forged in the fires of betrayal and emerged stronger for it. As he climbed into bed, his phone buzzed with a text from Yvonne. "Everything okay? Need anything?" Arthur smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. He typed back, "All good. Thank you, Yvonne, for everything." As he drifted off to sleep, Arthur's mind was filled with images of the coming days. The wedding, the reveal, the look on Isabel and Miguel's faces when they realized their game was up. But mixed in with these thoughts of vengeance was something else. A softer, warmer feeling that he wasn't quite ready to name, centered around the woman who had stood by him through it all. The next 2 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Arthur continued to play the role of the infirm groom-to-be, allowing Isabel to fuss over him and Miguel, to offer false words of encouragement. All the while, he was acutely aware of every glance they shared, every touch that lingered too long. Each moment of their betrayal only served to strengthen his resolve. On the eve of the wedding, Arthur found himself alone in his penthouse. Yvonne had gone to make some last-minute arrangements, and for the first time in months he felt the weight of solitude settling over him. He walked to the bar, pouring himself a glass of scotch, his first drink since the accident. As he sipped the amber liquid, savoring the burn, Arthur's mind wandered over the events that had led him to this moment. He thought of his parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give him a chance at the American dream. He thought of his early days in business, the long nights and hard work that had built Montenegro hotels from the ground up. He thought of Isabel, of the love he thought they had shared, and of Miguel, the friend he had trusted with his life. A wave of emotion washed over him. Anger, grief, determination, and something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Arthur realized that tomorrow wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life, about proving to himself and the world that Arthur Montenegro could not be broken. His reverie was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Yvonne walked in, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Everything's set," she announced. "The team is in place, the documents are ready. Tomorrow we take back what's yours." Arthur nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thank you, Yvonne. I couldn't have done this without you." Yvonne moved closer, her eyes searching his face. "Are you okay, Arthur? Having second thoughts?" Arthur shook his head, his resolve firming. "No second thoughts, just reflecting on everything that's brought us to this point." Yvonne reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Arthur, know that you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here. Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside him. In that moment, he saw not just the nurse who had helped him through his darkest days, but a woman of incredible strength, loyalty, and compassion, a woman who had seen him at his worst and stood by him nonetheless. Before he could second-guess himself, Arthur leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a soft, tender kiss. It was brief, almost chaste, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together. As they parted, both slightly breathless, Arthur smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Yvonne, for everything." Yvonne returned his smile, her eyes shining with emotion. "Get some rest, Arthur. Tomorrow is a big day." As she left, Arthur turned back to the window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom and would be again. Tomorrow he would face his betrayers. Tomorrow he would reclaim his life, and maybe, just maybe, he would begin something new, something real and true. With a deep breath, Arthur Montenegro turned away from the window and headed to bed. In just a few short hours, the curtain would rise on the final act of this drama, and he was ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. As dawn broke on the day of the wedding, Arthur Montenegro awoke with a sense of calm determination. He had spent months preparing for this day, meticulously crafting every detail of his plan. Now, as he stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A soft knock at the door announced Yvonne's arrival. She entered looking stunning in a deep blue dress that complemented her role as Arthur's personal nurse and confidant. Their eyes met in the mirror, and a moment of understanding passed between them. "Are you ready?" Yvonne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur turned to face her, his expression resolute. "More than ready. It's time to end this charade and take back what's mine." As they made their way to the church, Arthur's mind wandered back to the journey that had brought him to this point. He remembered the dark days in the hospital, the crushing weight of betrayal, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding himself. Each memory strengthened his resolve, reminding him of why he was doing this. The church was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Guests were already filing in, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Arthur played his part perfectly, appearing weak and dependent as he was wheeled down the aisle to take his place at the altar. He could feel the pitying glances of the guests, hear their whispered comments about his condition. Little did they know, the man they saw as broken was about to turn their world upside down. As the wedding march began to play, Arthur steeled himself for what was to come. He watched as Isabel glided down the aisle, a vision in white. To the casual observer, she looked every inch the blushing bride. But Arthur could see the calculation in her eyes, the barely concealed triumph as she approached what she thought would be her final victory. The ceremony began, with the priest's words washing over the assembled guests. Arthur responded to his cues mechanically, his mind focused on the moment of revelation to come. As they reached the exchange of vows, Arthur felt a surge of anticipation. "Isabel," he began, his voice surprisingly strong, "before we continue, there's something I need to say." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd as Arthur slowly stood up from his wheelchair. Isabel's eyes widened in shock. "Arthur, what are you doing? You shouldn't be—" "I'm doing what I should have done months ago," Arthur interrupted, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "I'm telling the truth." With that, he removed his dark glasses, revealing eyes that were clear and focused. The gasp from the assembled guests was audible. "For the past 6 months I've been recovering from an accident that was no accident at all, but a deliberate attempt on my life." Arthur's gaze swept the crowd before settling on Isabel and Miguel, who had gone pale. "An attempt orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in this world, my fiancée, Isabel, and my best friend Miguel." The church erupted into chaos as Arthur continued to speak, laying out the evidence of their betrayal. He detailed the embezzlement, the conspiracy, and their plans to take over his company. As he spoke, members of his legal team moved to block the exits, preventing Isabel and Miguel from fleeing. "I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a survivor," Arthur declared, his voice ringing with authority. "I've overcome their betrayal. I've reclaimed my health, and now I'm reclaiming my life and my company." As if on cue, Sarah Goldstein stepped forward, presenting Isabel and Miguel with legal documents. "You'll find that all your assets have been frozen," she informed them crisply, "and the police are waiting outside to take you into custody." The look of shock and defeat on Isabel and Miguel's faces was something Arthur would remember for the rest of his life. As they were led away in handcuffs, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a deep sadness for what might have been. In the aftermath of the revelations, the church buzzed with shocked conversations. Arthur found himself surrounded by well-wishers and those eager to realign themselves with him now that he was back on top. Through it all, Yvonne remained by his side, a steady presence amidst the chaos. As the day wore on and the initial shock began to wear off, Arthur retreated to his penthouse for some much-needed solitude. Standing on his balcony, looking out over the city he had reclaimed, he felt a sense of closure. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had instead made him stronger, more resilient. Yvonne joined him on the balcony, her presence a comfort in the fading light. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering. "Relieved," he finally said, "but also hollow in a way. I've spent so long focused on this moment, on getting justice. Now that it's done, I'm not sure what comes next." Yvonne reached out, taking his hand in hers. "What comes next is up to you, Arthur. You've reclaimed your life, now you get to decide what to do with it." As they stood there, hand in hand, Arthur felt a spark of excitement at the possibilities that lay before him. He had survived betrayal, had rebuilt himself from the ground up. Now he had the chance to reshape his life and his company in whatever way he saw fit. Over the next few weeks, Arthur threw himself into restructuring Montenegro hotels. He implemented new safeguards to prevent future embezzlement, promoted loyal employees who had stood by him during his absence, and began exploring new directions for the company. Throughout it all, Yvonne remained by his side, transitioning from his nurse to his personal assistant and confidant. Their relationship continued to deepen, built on a foundation of trust and shared experience that went beyond mere romance. One evening, as they worked late in his office, Arthur found himself watching Yvonne as she pored over some financial reports. He was struck by how natural it felt to have her there, how seamlessly she had become an integral part of his life. "Yvonne," he said softly, causing her to look up, "I've been thinking about us." Yvonne set down the reports, giving him her full attention. "What about us?" Arthur took a deep breath. "These past months, you've been my rock, my support through everything. You saw me at my lowest and helped me rise again. I can't imagine my life without you in it." He moved around the desk, taking her hands in his. "I'm not proposing. Not yet. We've both been through too much for that. But I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. It's not born out of gratitude or dependency. It's something deeper, something true." Yvonne's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered, "I feel the same way." "But are you sure? After everything that happened with Isabel?" Arthur nodded firmly. "I'm sure. You've shown me what real loyalty, real care looks like. With you, I'm not Arthur Montenegro, the CEO or the betrayed fiancé. I'm just me, and that's more precious than anything." As they leaned in for a kiss, Arthur felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had survived betrayal, had reclaimed his life and his company. But more than that, he had found something genuine and true. With Yvonne by his side, he was ready to face whatever the future might hold. In the months that followed, Arthur continued to rebuild and expand his empire. Montenegro hotels flourished under his renewed leadership, branching out into new markets and innovative hospitality concepts. But more importantly, Arthur flourished as a person. The bitterness and anger that had driven him in the wake of the betrayal gradually gave way to a new outlook on life. He became known not just as a savvy businessman, but as a philanthropist, using his wealth and influence to support causes close to his heart. He established a foundation to help victims of fraud and betrayal, drawing on his own experiences to create a support system for those who had been wronged. Arthur and Yvonne's relationship continued to grow, built on a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. They took things slowly, both aware of the weight of their past experiences. But with each passing day, their bond deepened, evolving into a partnership that encompassed all aspects of their lives. 1 year after the fateful wedding day that had changed everything, Arthur found himself once again standing on the balcony of his penthouse, Yvonne by his side. As they looked out over the city, he marveled at how much had changed. "A penny for your thoughts," Yvonne said, nudging him gently. Arthur smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it's just beginning." Yvonne leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You're an amazing man, Arthur Montenegro. You turned a tragedy into a triumph." "We did," Arthur corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." As the sun set over Miami, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Arthur felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had faced betrayal, had stared into the abyss of despair, and had emerged stronger for it. With Yvonne by his side and a new perspective on life, he was ready for whatever challenges the future might hold. The story of Arthur Montenegro was far from over, but now it was a story of resilience, of second chances, and of the power of true partnership. As he stood there, holding Yvonne close, Arthur knew that the best chapters of his life were yet to be written. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear over Miami, the azure sky dotted with wispy clouds that seemed to herald new beginnings. For most of the guests arriving at the opulent St. Regis Bal Harbour Resort, it was a day of celebration, the union of two of Miami's most prominent socialites. But for Arthur Montenegro, it was the culmination of months of meticulous planning, the day he would reclaim his life and expose the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows, Arthur stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands. The man who looked back at him bore little resemblance to the broken figure who had left the hospital months ago. His eyes, once dim with despair, now shone with determination and a hint of steel. The soft knock at the door announced Yvonne's arrival. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur turned to face her, drinking in the sight of her in an elegant navy dress that complemented her role as his personal nurse and confidant. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice calm and resolute. They made their way to the resort in silence, the weight of the day's events hanging heavy between them. As they pulled up to the grand entrance, Arthur took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He allowed Yvonne to help him into the wheelchair, once again donning the mask of the infirm, betrayed groom. The grand ballroom was a vision of white and gold, flowers cascading from every surface and crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the assembled guests. Arthur could feel their pitying glances as Yvonne wheeled him down the aisle, hear their whispered comments about his condition. If only they knew the truth that was about to unfold. As the strains of the wedding march filled the air, Arthur's heart began to race. This was it, the moment of truth. He watched as Isabel glided down the aisle, a vision in white lace and silk. To the casual observer, she was the picture of a blushing bride. But Arthur could see the calculation in her eyes, the barely concealed triumph as she approached what she thought would be her crowning victory. The ceremony began, the priest's words washing over the assembled guests. Arthur played his part perfectly, responding to his cues with a voice that he kept deliberately weak and wavering. As they reached the exchange of vows, he felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. It was time. "Isabel," he began, his voice suddenly strong and clear. "Before we continue, there's something I need to say." A ripple of confusion ran through the crowd as Arthur slowly rose from his wheelchair, standing tall and straight. Isabel's eyes widened in shock. "Arthur, what are you doing? You shouldn't be—" "I'm doing what I should have done months ago," Arthur interrupted, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "I'm telling the truth." With a swift motion, he removed his dark glasses, revealing eyes that were clear, focused, and blazing with righteous anger. The collective gasp from the assembled guests was audible. "For the past 6 months I've been recovering from an accident that was no accident at all, but a deliberate attempt on my life." Arthur's gaze swept the crowd before settling on Isabel and Miguel, who had gone deathly pale. An attempt orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in this world, my fiancée Isabel and my best friend Miguel. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests began murmuring in shock and disbelief, some rising from their seats in confusion. Isabel took a step back, her face a mask of horror and dawning realization. "Arthur, please," she stammered. "You don't know what you're saying. The accident, it's affected your mind." "My mind is clearer than it's ever been," Arthur cut her off, his voice hard as steel. "Clear enough to see through your lies, your betrayal, your greed." He turned to address the stunned guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary. You see, while I was lying in that hospital bed, supposedly blind and broken, I discovered a truth more painful than any physical injury. The woman I loved and the man I considered my brother had not only betrayed me emotionally, but had actively tried to kill me. Arthur nodded to Yvonne, who stepped forward with a tablet. With a few taps, she brought up financial records and email exchanges on the large screens that had been set up for the wedding slideshow. The guests gasped as they saw evidence of embezzlement, conspiratorial messages, and the damning proof of Isabel and Miguel's plot. "You see," Arthur continued, his voice now tinged with a mixture of pain and cold fury, "they thought they had the perfect plan. Stage an accident, take control of my company while I was incapacitated, and then, when the time was right, finish what they started. But they underestimated me. They underestimated the strength that comes from fighting back against betrayal." Miguel, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly made a dash for the exit, but he found his path blocked by members of Arthur's security team who had been strategically placed around the ballroom. "Going somewhere, old friend?" Arthur's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I'm afraid your trip will have to wait. The police are very interested in having a conversation with you." As if on cue, the doors to the ballroom burst open, and a team of police officers entered, led by Detective Sarah Rodriguez. "Isabel Reyes, Miguel Sanchez," she announced, her voice ringing through the now silent room. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and embezzlement." The look of utter defeat on Isabel and Miguel's faces as they were handcuffed and read their rights was something Arthur knew he would remember for the rest of his life. But even in this moment of triumph, he felt a deep sadness for what might have been, for the love and friendship he had thought were real. As Isabel was led past him, she turned, her eyes brimming with tears. "Arthur, please," she begged. "You have to believe me. I loved you. I never wanted—" "Save it for the judge, Isabel." Arthur cut her off, his voice cold. "You had your chance to tell the truth. Now, it's too late." As the police escorted Isabel and Miguel out of the ballroom, the guests erupted into a frenzy of shocked conversations and exclamations. Arthur found himself surrounded by a mix of well-wishers, shocked friends, and those eager to realign themselves with him now that he was back on top. Through it all, Yvonne remained by his side, a steady presence amidst the chaos. Arthur felt a wave of gratitude wash over him as he looked at her, realizing once again how crucial she had been to his recovery and his plan. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur addressed the crowd once more, his voice cutting through the din. "I apologize for the disruption to what you thought would be a joyous occasion, but I hope you understand why this deception was necessary. I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a survivor. I've overcome their betrayal. I've reclaimed my health, and now I'm reclaiming my life and my company." He paused, looking out over the sea of shocked and sympathetic faces. "Montenegro hotels will continue to thrive, stronger and more secure than ever before, and I will personally ensure that those who sought to destroy me face the full consequences of their actions." As the gravity of the situation sank in, the ballroom began to clear out. Guests left in small groups, their excited chatter a mix of shock, sympathy, and the thrill of having witnessed such a dramatic turn of events. Arthur found himself approached by various business associates, all eager to reaffirm their loyalty and express their amazement at his resilience. Through it all, Arthur maintained his composure, but Yvonne could see the toll the day's events were taking on him. As the last of the guests were ushered out, she gently touched his arm. "Arthur," she said softly, "I think it's time we got you out of here." He nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the past months crashing down on him. As they made their way to the exit, they were intercepted by Detective Rodriguez. "Mr. Montenegro," she said, her tone respectful but firm, "I know this has been a trying day, but we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement." Arthur nodded. "Of course, Detective. I'll be there first thing in the morning. I have all the evidence you'll need to ensure that Isabel and Miguel face justice." As they stepped out into the warm Miami afternoon, Arthur took a deep breath, feeling as if he were breathing freely for the first time in months. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city he had once again claimed as his own. "Where to now?" Yvonne asked, as they approached the waiting car. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering. "The office," he said finally. "There's still work to be done." The ride to Montenegro Hotel's headquarters was silent, both Arthur and Yvonne lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled up to the imposing glass and steel building, Arthur felt a surge of emotion. This was where it had all begun, where he had built his empire from the ground up, and now he would rebuild it once again, stronger and more secure than ever before. As they entered his office, Arthur was struck by how little had changed. Everything was exactly as he had left it on the day of the accident. He walked slowly to his desk, running his hand along the polished surface. "It feels like a lifetime ago," he murmured, more to himself than to Yvonne. She stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Arthur. You took back what was yours." He turned to face her, his eyes shining with a mix of triumph and unshed tears. "We did it, Yvonne. I couldn't have done any of this without you." For a moment they stood there, the weight of everything they had been through together hanging in the air between them. Then, slowly, Arthur leaned in, his lips meeting Yvonne's in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a culmination of months of growing trust and affection. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Yvonne, for everything." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarah Goldstein, Arthur's lead attorney, entered, her face flushed with excitement. "Arthur, I've just gotten word from the DA's office. They're moving forward with all charges against Isabel and Miguel. With the evidence we've provided, they're confident of a conviction." Arthur nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and lingering sadness. "Good. They need to face the consequences of their actions." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then continued, "There's more. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. They want to reinstate you as CEO immediately." Arthur took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Then let's not keep them waiting. It's time to take back control of my company." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Arthur met with the board, laying out his plans for the future of Montenegro hotels. He detailed new safeguards to prevent future embezzlement, outlined strategies for expansion, and reassured investors of the company's stability. By the time the meeting concluded, Arthur had been unanimously reinstated as CEO, his control of the company he had built firmly re-established. As the last of the board members filed out, congratulating Arthur on his triumphant return, he found himself alone in the boardroom with Yvonne. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Miami skyline that was now bathed in the glow of sunset. "How are you feeling?" Yvonne asked, coming to stand beside him. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering. "Victorious," he said finally, "but also sad, in a way. I've spent so long focused on this moment, on getting justice. Now that it's done, I'm not sure what comes next." Yvonne reached out, taking his hand in hers. "What comes next is up to you, Arthur. You've reclaimed your life, your company. Now you get to decide what to do with them." Arthur turned to her, struck once again by her strength, her unwavering support. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "I want you to be a part of it." Yvonne smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Arthur. We're in this together." As they stood there, hand in hand, looking out over the city, Arthur felt a spark of excitement at the possibilities that lay before him. He had survived betrayal, had rebuilt himself from the ground up. Now he had the chance to reshape his life and his company in whatever way he saw fit. The next few days were a blur of activity. News of Arthur's dramatic revelation at the wedding and his return to power spread like wildfire through Miami's business and social circles. The press clamored for interviews, investors sought reassurances, and Arthur found himself at the center of a media storm. Through it all, he maintained his composure, presenting a united front with Yvonne by his side. In press conferences and interviews, he spoke candidly about his experience, using his story to shed light on issues of corporate fraud and the importance of vigilance in business. 1 week after the fateful wedding day, Arthur sat in his office reviewing the latest financial reports. The company had taken a hit in the immediate aftermath of the scandal, but thanks to Arthur's swift action and transparent handling of the situation, stocks were already beginning to rebound. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Yvonne entered, a small smile on her face. "Arthur, there's someone here to see you." Arthur looked up, curious. "Who is it?" Yvonne stepped aside, revealing a familiar face that Arthur hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he gasped, rising from his chair. Maria Montenegro rushed forward, enveloping her son in a tight embrace. "Oh, Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My brave, strong boy." As they separated, Arthur could see the mixture of pride and concern in his mother's eyes. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. "Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Arthur sighed, guiding his mother to a seat. "I'm sorry, Mom. I wanted to protect you from all of this, and I needed to handle it on my own." Maria reached out, cupping her son's face in her hands. "You're never alone, Arthur, never forget that." As Arthur looked from his mother to Yvonne, who stood watching the reunion with a warm smile, he felt a surge of emotion. These were the real relationships in his life, built on love, trust, and unwavering support. "I know that now, Mum," he said softly. "I know that now." As the day drew to a close, Arthur found himself once again standing on the balcony of his penthouse, Yvonne by his side. The city stretched out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights against the darkening sky. "What are you thinking?" Yvonne asked, her voice soft in the evening air. Arthur was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm thinking about second chances," he said finally. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing in your life." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Yvonne, these past months have been the hardest of my life, but they've also shown me what really matters. You've seen me at my lowest, helped me rise again. You've been my strength, my conscience, my partner in every way." Yvonne's eyes widened as Arthur slowly lowered himself to one knee. "Arthur, what are you—" "Yvonne Santos," Arthur said, his voice filled with emotion. "I know this might seem sudden, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Yvonne stood frozen, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then slowly a radiant smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Arthur Montenegro, I will marry you." As Arthur slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple yet elegant diamond that represented new beginnings, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced betrayal, had stared into the abyss of despair, and had emerged stronger for it. With Yvonne by his side, he was ready for whatever challenges the future might hold. The story of Arthur Montenegro was far from over, but now it was a story of resilience, of second chances, and of the power of true love. As he stood there holding Yvonne close, Arthur knew that the best chapters of his life were yet to be written. In the days and weeks that followed, Arthur threw himself into rebuilding and expanding Montenegro hotels. The company flourished under his renewed leadership, branching out into new markets and innovative hospitality concepts. But more importantly, Arthur flourished as a person. The bitterness and anger that had driven him in the wake of the betrayal gradually gave way to a new outlook on life. He became known not just as a savvy businessman, but as a philanthropist, using his wealth and influence to support causes close to his heart. He established a foundation to help victims of fraud and betrayal, drawing on his own experiences to create a support system for those who had been wronged. As for Isabel and Miguel, their trial became one of the most high-profile cases in Miami's recent history. Arthur testified, his composed demeanor and clear recounting of events leaving no doubt in the jury's minds about the couple's guilt. The evidence was overwhelming, from financial records showing the embezzlement to emails detailing their plan to take over the company. The courtroom was packed every day, with journalists and curious onlookers vying for seats to witness the drama unfold. Isabel and Miguel, once the picture of success and charm, now appeared haggard and defeated, the weight of their actions evident in their drawn faces and slumped shoulders. As the trial progressed, more details of their betrayal came to light. It was revealed that their plan had been in motion for over a year before the accident, with Miguel slowly gaining Arthur's trust and positioning himself to take over key aspects of the company. Isabel's role was equally calculated, her affections for Arthur, a carefully crafted act designed to blind him to their machinations. The most damning evidence came in the form of a recorded conversation between Isabel and Miguel, captured by a hidden microphone Yvonne had managed to plant in Miguel's office. In it, they callously discussed Arthur's accident, expressing disappointment that it hadn't finished the job and planning their next move. When the recording was played in court, a hush fell over the room. Arthur, hearing the full extent of their betrayal for the first time, felt a mixture of pain and vindication wash over him. Yvonne, sitting beside him, squeezed his hand in silent support. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the jury took less than a day to reach their verdict. As the foreman stood to deliver the decision, the courtroom held its collective breath. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendants Isabel Reyes and Miguel Sanchez guilty. The words rang out, followed by a litany of additional guilty verdicts for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As the judge read out the sentences, 25 years to life for each of them, Arthur felt a complex mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, and a sense of justice served. But there was also a profound sadness for what might have been, for the relationships he had thought were genuine. As Isabel and Miguel were led away in handcuffs, Isabel turned to look at Arthur one last time. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and for a brief moment, Arthur saw a flicker of the woman he had once loved, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of cold defiance. Outside the courthouse, Arthur faced a sea of reporters, their questions coming rapid fire. With Yvonne by his side, he addressed the media, his voice steady and resolute. "Today, justice has been served," he began. "But this is not a day for celebration. It's a day for reflection on the nature of trust, on the importance of integrity in business and in personal relationships, and on the resilience of the human spirit." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "To those who have supported me through this ordeal, I offer my deepest gratitude. To those who may find themselves in similar situations, I say this: do not let the actions of others define you. Use your pain as fuel for growth, for change, for becoming a better version of yourself." As the questions continued to fly, Arthur felt a sense of closure settling over him. The nightmare that had begun on that dark stretch of road months ago was finally coming to an end. But as one chapter closed, another was just beginning. With the trial behind him, Arthur could now focus fully on rebuilding his company and his life. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with Yvonne by his side and the lessons of the past firmly in mind, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they left the courthouse, Arthur and Yvonne walked hand in hand, their steps in perfect sync. The Miami sun shone brightly overhead, seeming to herald a new beginning. For Arthur Montenegro, it was more than just the end of a trial. It was the dawn of a new era, one built on the foundations of truth, resilience, and love. In the wake of the dramatic revelations at the ill-fated wedding, Miami's high society was left reeling. The story of Arthur Montenegro's betrayal and triumphant return dominated headlines for weeks, becoming the talk of the town from the sun-soaked beaches of South Beach to the opulent mansions of Coral Gables. For Arthur, the days following the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. His phone rang incessantly with calls from journalists, business associates, and long-lost acquaintances, all eager to hear his story firsthand. But Arthur remained selective about his public appearances, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding his company and preparing for the legal battles ahead. Montenegro Hotels, once teetering on the brink of a scandal-induced collapse, began to stabilize under Arthur's renewed leadership. His transparent handling of the situation and his personal story of resilience resonated with both employees and clients. The company's stock, which had taken a significant hit in the immediate aftermath of the revelations, started to recover as investor confidence was gradually restored. But even as Arthur worked tirelessly to right the ship of his business empire, he couldn't escape the emotional fallout of the betrayal. Nights were often restless, filled with vivid dreams of the accident and haunting replays of Isabel and Miguel's duplicity. It was during these dark hours that Arthur found solace in Yvonne's unwavering presence. One particularly difficult night, as Arthur sat on the balcony of his penthouse unable to sleep, Yvonne joined him, wrapping a warm blanket around his shoulders. "Want to talk about it?" she asked softly, her hand finding his in the darkness. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city lights twinkling below. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could I have been so blind?" Yvonne squeezed his hand gently. "Arthur, you weren't blind. You were trusting. There's a difference. Your capacity to trust, to see the good in people, that's not a weakness. It's one of your greatest strengths." Her words, spoken with such conviction, touched something deep within Arthur. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt the hard shell of anger and hurt begin to crack, allowing a glimmer of healing to seep through. As dawn broke over the Miami skyline, Arthur made a decision. He would not let Isabel and Miguel's actions define him. He would use this experience not just to become a better businessman, but a better person. The legal proceedings against Isabel and Miguel moved swiftly, thanks in large part to the mountain of evidence Arthur and his team had accumulated. The trial became a media sensation, with journalists and curious onlookers packing the courthouse each day to witness the unfolding drama. Arthur's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. As he took the stand, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence. With quiet dignity and unwavering resolve, Arthur recounted the events leading up to the accident, the betrayal he uncovered, and the elaborate scheme to take over his company. "Mr. Montenegro," the prosecutor asked, "can you describe your feelings when you first realized the extent of Ms. Reyes and Mr. Sanchez's betrayal?" Arthur paused, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom before settling on Isabel and Miguel. "At first I felt a pain so deep I thought it might consume me," he said, his voice steady. "But then I felt something else, a determination to not let their actions destroy everything I had built, everything I believed in." Throughout his testimony, Arthur remained composed, his words measured and clear, but those who knew him well could see the emotional toll it was taking. Yvonne, watching from the gallery, felt her heart ache for the man who had endured so much, yet remained standing. As Arthur stepped down from the witness stand, his eyes met Yvonne's. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them, a promise of support, of understanding, of a future beyond this courtroom drama. The trial lasted for weeks, with a parade of witnesses testifying to Isabel and Miguel's duplicity. Financial experts detailed the complex web of embezzlement and fraud. Former employees of Montenegro hotels spoke of the subtle changes in company dynamics after Arthur's accident. Even the mechanic who had been hired to tamper with Arthur's car brakes took the stand, his testimony sealing the fate of the accused. Throughout it all, Isabel and Miguel maintained their innocence, their once polished facades crumbling under the weight of the evidence against them. But the jury was not swayed by their protestations. After 3 days of deliberation, the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of reactions, gasps, cries, the furious scribbling of journalists' pens. But Arthur remained still, his expression unreadable as he watched his former fiancé and best friend being led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by a sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions, Arthur finally broke his silence. "Today, justice has been served," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the clamor of the press. "But this is not a day for celebration. It's a day for reflection, on the nature of trust, on the importance of integrity in business and in life, and on the power of resilience in the face of adversity." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "To those who have supported me through this ordeal, I offer my deepest gratitude. To those who may find themselves in similar situations, I say this: do not let the actions of others define you. Use your pain as fuel for growth, for change, for becoming a better version of yourself." With those words, Arthur turned and walked away, Yvonne by his side, leaving behind a buzz of speculation and admiration. In the months that followed, Arthur threw himself into transforming Montenegro hotels. He implemented new corporate governance structures, increased transparency in all financial dealings, and launched a company-wide initiative focused on ethical business practices. But his transformation wasn't limited to the boardroom. Arthur began to re-evaluate every aspect of his life, questioning old habits and beliefs that no longer served him. He started each day with meditation, a practice Yvonne had introduced him to during his recovery. He made time for regular exercise, rediscovering the joy of movement after months of physical therapy. Most significantly, Arthur started to open himself up emotionally. The walls he had built around his heart in the wake of Isabel's betrayal began to crumble, thanks in large part to Yvonne's patient understanding and unwavering support. Their relationship deepened and evolved, moving beyond the boundaries of nurse and patient, beyond even friendship. They began to build a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep, abiding love that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. One balmy Miami evening, as they strolled along the beach hand in hand, Arthur suddenly stopped, turning to face Yvonne. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "About us, about the future." Yvonne looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "What about the future?" Arthur took both her hands in his gaze never leaving hers. "Yvonne, you've seen me at my worst. You've been my strength when I had none left. You've challenged me, supported me, believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I can't imagine my life without you in it." Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Yvonne Santos, will you marry me? Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as the beginning of something new, something real and true. Tears glistened in Yvonne's eyes as she nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. As Arthur slipped the ring onto her finger, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, symbolizing growth and new beginnings, she finally found her voice. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Their engagement made headlines, of course, but this time Arthur welcomed the attention, using it as an opportunity to share a message of hope and resilience. In interviews, he spoke candidly about his journey, about the lessons he had learned, and about the transformative power of love. "What happened with Isabel and Miguel nearly broke me," he told one interviewer, "but it also forced me to confront hard truths about myself, about the way I had been living my life. In losing what I thought was everything, I found something far more valuable, a true partnership, a deeper understanding of myself and a new purpose. That new purpose began to take shape in the form of the Montenegro Foundation for Ethics in Business." Using a significant portion of his personal wealth, Arthur established an organization dedicated to promoting ethical business practices, supporting whistleblowers, and providing resources for victims of corporate fraud. The foundation quickly gained recognition for its innovative programs, including a mentorship initiative that paired seasoned executives with young entrepreneurs, emphasizing the importance of integrity in business from the ground up. Arthur's transformation extended to his personal life as well. He reconnected with old friends who had fallen by the wayside during his rapid rise to success. He made time for family, organizing regular Sunday dinners with his mother and siblings, a tradition that had lapsed in recent years. As Arthur and Yvonne began to plan their wedding, they decided on a small, intimate ceremony, a far cry from the lavish spectacle that had been planned with Isabel. They chose to exchange vows on the beach at sunrise, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. On the morning of the wedding, as the first rays of sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Arthur stood waiting for his bride. As Yvonne appeared, walking towards him across the sand, Arthur felt a sense of peace and rightness that he had never experienced before. Their vows, written by themselves, spoke of resilience, of forgiveness, of the strength found in vulnerability. As they exchanged rings, Arthur felt as if he were closing one chapter of his life and beginning another, one filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. At the reception that followed, Arthur raised a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered guests. "To the lessons learned from our hardships, and the strength we find in each other. But most of all, to love, not the fairy tale kind, but the real, messy, beautiful love that sees us at our worst and chooses to stay anyway." As he looked at Yvonne, radiant in her simple white dress, Arthur felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey that had brought him to this moment had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache. But it had also led him to a deeper understanding of himself, to a love more genuine than he had ever known, and to a new purpose that filled him with excitement for the future. In the years that followed, Arthur and Yvonne's partnership flourished, both in their personal lives and in their shared mission to make a positive impact on the world. Montenegro Hotels expanded its ethical business model globally, becoming a beacon of corporate responsibility in the hospitality industry. The Montenegro Foundation grew in scope and influence, its programs touching lives across the country and beyond. Arthur became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story of resilience and transformation with audiences ranging from college students to corporate executives. But perhaps the most profound change was the one least visible to the outside world. Arthur, once driven solely by ambition and the pursuit of success, found a new balance in his life. He learned to appreciate the quiet moments. Morning coffee with Yvonne, weekends spent sailing on Biscayne Bay, evenings volunteering at local shelters. One night, as they sat on the balcony of their penthouse, watching the Miami skyline twinkle in the distance, Yvonne turned to Arthur. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Arthur was quiet for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him, the long road to recovery, the transformation of his life and his very self. "You know," he said finally, a smile playing on his lips, "I am. Not in the way I once thought happiness should look. It's deeper than that, more real. I'm content, fulfilled in a way I never was before." He reached out, taking Yvonne's hand in his. "I've learned that true happiness isn't about having everything go your way. It's about finding meaning in the challenges, about growing through the pain. It's about having someone by your side who sees all of you, the good, the bad, the broken parts, and loves you anyway. Yvonne squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm happy too, she whispered. So very happy. As they sat there, hand in hand, looking out over the city that had witnessed their entire journey, Arthur felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had instead become the catalyst for a richer, more authentic life. He had lost much, it was true, but in that loss, he had gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of himself, a love built on a foundation of trust and shared experience, and a purpose that extended far beyond personal success. Arthur Montenegro's story was far from over, but now it was a story of resilience, of second chances, and of the transformative power of love. As he looked towards the future, hand in hand with Yvonne, he felt ready for whatever challenges and joys lay ahead, for he had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength comes not from never falling, but from rising every time we fall, and that the greatest victories are often born from our deepest defeats. 5 years after the dramatic events that had reshaped his life, Arthur Montenegro stood on the balcony of his Miami penthouse, gazing out at the city he once again called his own. The skyline had changed, with new towers rising alongside the familiar silhouettes, much like how Arthur's life had evolved, familiar at its core, yet irrevocably altered. At 50, Arthur cut a different figure from the brash, ambitious young tycoon he had once been. His hair was now streaked with distinguished silver, and lines of experience etched his face. But his eyes held a warmth and wisdom that had been hard-won through trials and tribulations. "Daddy, Daddy!" A small voice called from inside, drawing a smile to Arthur's face. He turned to see his 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, toddling towards him, her dark curls bouncing with each step. "There's my little princess," Arthur said, scooping her up into his arms. As he held her close, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, he marveled at how complete his life had become. Yvonne appeared in the doorway, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant with their second child, she glowed with an inner radiance that still took Arthur's breath away. "Everything okay out here?" she asked, joining them on the balcony. Arthur wrapped his free arm around her, pulling his family close. "Everything's perfect," he murmured, placing a soft kiss on her temple. As they stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, Arthur reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had instead become the catalyst for a richer, more authentic life. Montenegro Hotels had not only recovered from the scandal, but had flourished under Arthur's renewed leadership. The company had become known for its ethical business practices and innovative approach to hospitality, expanding globally with a reputation for integrity that set it apart in the industry. But it was the Montenegro Foundation that had truly become Arthur's passion. What had started as a way to promote ethical business practices had grown into a multinational organization dedicated to supporting victims of fraud and corporate malfeasance. The Foundation's programs had helped countless individuals rebuild their lives, turning their own stories of betrayal into narratives of resilience and triumph. Arthur's thoughts drifted briefly to Isabel and Miguel. Last he had heard, they were still serving their sentences in federal prison. The news had reported that Isabel had taken up painting, her works gaining some notoriety in the outsider art world. Miguel, it was said, had become a model prisoner, tutoring fellow inmates working towards their GEDs. While Arthur no longer harbored the burning anger he once felt towards them, he couldn't deny the twinge of sadness that still arose when he thought of what might have been. But that sadness was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the joy and fullness of his present life. "What are you thinking about?" Yvonne asked, noticing his momentary distraction. Arthur smiled, tightening his embrace around his family. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing in your life." Yvonne nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had been there through it all, had seen him at his lowest and helped him rise again. Their love story wasn't one of fairy tale romance, but of two people who had chosen each other day after day through hardship and joy alike. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Arthur felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The betrayal he had experienced had taught him the true meaning of loyalty and love. It had shown him the strength that lies in vulnerability and the power of resilience in the face of adversity. "Daddy," Sophia piped up, her small hand patting his cheek to get his attention. "Tell me a story." Arthur chuckled, moving to sit on one of the balcony chairs with his daughter in his lap. Yvonne settled into the chair beside them, her hand finding his. "Once upon a time," Arthur began, his voice soft and rich with emotion, "there was a man who thought he had everything, but then he lost it all, and in losing everything he found something far more precious." As Arthur wove the tale of loss, discovery, and redemption, he realized he was telling not just Sophia's bedtime story, but the story of his own life. It was a story of how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest dawns, of how true strength comes not from never falling, but from rising every time we fall. Looking at Yvonne, her eyes shining with love and understanding, and feeling Sophia's warm weight against his chest, Arthur knew that he had found his happy ending. Not the kind found in fairy tales, but something far more real and enduring. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had instead become the foundation upon which he had built a life of purpose, integrity, and love. It had taught him that while we cannot control the actions of others, we can always choose how we respond to them. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to twinkle overhead, Arthur Montenegro felt at peace. He had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged not just intact but transformed. His story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the redemptive power of love. In that moment, surrounded by the family he had built and the life he had reclaimed, Arthur knew that he had not just survived, he had triumphed. And in that triumph, he had discovered the most valuable lesson of all, that true love, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and shared experiences, can weather any storm and emerge stronger for having faced it together. As Sophia's eyes began to droop and Yvonne's hand tightened in his, Arthur realized that this moment, this life, was the true meaning of success. Not the wealth he had accumulated or the empire he had built, but the love he had found, the family he had created, and the legacy of integrity and resilience he would leave behind. And so, as the night settled over Miami, Arthur Montenegro held his family close, grateful for the journey that had brought him here, and excited for all the adventures yet to come. For he knew now that life's greatest victories are often born from our deepest defeats, and that with love, courage, and perseverance, even the darkest night can lead to the most beautiful dawn. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and emotional tales, make sure to subscribe to our channel to catch the new stories we share daily. And if you missed our latest story, here's what happened. She believed she had found true love, never imagining that her Prince Charming hid a heart of ice. While Sadie dreamed of a happy future, Hudson was secretly planning to discard her like a worthless object, humiliating her and replacing her with a younger woman. But destiny has mysterious ways, and an unexpected pregnancy was about to change the game. The problem? Hudson had no idea of the power a determined mother can wield, and he was about to learn the hard way. Get ready for a story full of emotional twists where the smell of success is sweeter than revenge, and served hot, straight from destiny's oven. Want to find out what happened next? Then click on the video appearing on your screen now and see it all unfold. I'll see you there.